Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Hello, everyone. Hello to the new people who have just rolled in. Hello, new people. I see you. You're definitely enjoying the free snacks. Find a seat. Don't be shy. Get in. Get comfortable. We are in the home straight now for one of our last chats. How is everyone? How we doing? We okay? That was pathetic. How we doing? You okay? You with me, guys? Yeah. Okay, I feel like I'm at a creche trying to round the children and get them excited about story time before their parents come to pick them up. Well, I promise this final stretch is definitely worth the wait, so thank you so much for sticking around with us, guys. Okay, now a little earlier on during the conversation with Ade and Naomi Harris, a lot was spoken about meditation. And funnily enough, PUMA have on their Spotify channel some eco-anxiety meditations as read by Cara Delevingne. So if you want to check those out, please go and do so. Before we go any further, could we please make some noise one more time for Bella and that performance we just had? Thank you. Okay, my biggest personal challenge for the next straight and the final chunk of today's event is to try and make my friend, the man in the sunglasses there, smile and maybe clap his hands at some point and really enjoy what's about to be presented to him. You look like a tough customer to please, but I will get you on side before the end of this, sir. Okay, there is one conversation left, and I'm actually getting involved in this one. I'm going to be asking the questions this time around, which I'm very excited about because this conversation is about creating change through industry collaboration. Now, before I introduce your panelists, we've got a bit of a film for you, so check this out.
We've always been about pushing ourselves to be better, stronger, faster. Whether we're on the sports field or the high street, we do it for the people who believe in us and our brand. But the time has come to think bigger than that, because the climate crisis is bigger than us, bigger than one brand, bigger than sportswear, bigger than all of our industry put together. We see its impact every day all over the world, from wildfires across Europe to heat waves in India, extreme thunderstorms in Ontario, and the flooding of Yellowstone National Park.
The worst flooding in the Western Europe. Overwhelming.
So, for the sake of our planet, for the sake of each other, we need to act as one, to act together, to turn individual innovations into shared solutions, individual goals into shared ambitions. It's time we bridge the gap between brands, industries, and borders to make progress forever faster. Because the only way to create forever better is to work together.
Okay. Okay, let's keep that in mind because we hear a lot about collaboration in fashion, but there is a much bigger story to tell. Now today, we're talking about collaboration behind the scenes, not just with your favorite streetwear brand. Today, we're talking about being better together. So, are you ready for our final panel? He's unsure. Sunglasses man is still unsure. We're going to get you there. Don't worry about it. Okay, can we please make some noise to welcome our next panelists? Put your hands together, please. First and foremost, don't be shy. Put your hands together. Thank you. First and foremost, welcoming to the stage, Alice Eady. Make some noise for her. Here she comes. Alice is a filmmaker and next-generation thinker. Keep that round of applause going for the CEO of PUMA. Please make some noise for Bjorn Golden. Don't be shy about keeping the clapping going. He's not wearing any Puma, but that's okay. Please welcome the CEO of Under Armour. This is Colin Brown. My guy. And please keep that applause going as well for the sector engagement lead from the UN Climate Change. It's Lindita Shafari Selu. And last but not least, please make some noise for Louis Chen, CEO of Diamond Group. Okay. All right, there's a lot of pressing questions to dive into. Also, remember, we need you to forward your questions as well. If you have anything to ask this panel of incredibly impressive people, myself not included. Please get those questions in. I've been talking about it all day. We have QR codes behind the panel. If you want to click a photo on one of those and go to the website and actually punch a question in if you don't want to ask it face to face, you can do so there. Or if you want to get involved in the Q&A part of the conversation, we're going old school. We're going to need you to raise your hand, even if you have sweat patches, and we will find you with a microphone and get you to ask a question to our panel. Okay, let's dive in straight away. Bjorn, how would you say sustainability has developed in the industry over the last 30 years?
I think when I started in the industry, which is 30 years ago, even more scary, sustainability didn't exist. It was about making as much product as we could, as cheap as possible. And I think, to be very honest with you, I think we, the Western customer, exploited, the suppliers. And we had no, what should I say, guidance in how to treat neither the people nor the climate, nor, I would say, the environment. I think now it's a totally different world. There's not one day as a CEO that sustainability and how we treat the planet, the people and the environment is not on the table. And even 10 years ago at PUMA, if I had a meeting on sustainability in a town hall, there would maybe be 20 people showing up. Now I have 1,000. So I think it's not about sustainability, yes or no. It's about how do we do this in the best and most efficient way. And just one final comment. Yes, the language to the younger people is important, but we need the science to do what we say. Because it's very easy to send messages. And there's a lot of greenwashing with words. But you need science to renewable energy, you need it to materials, you need it to circularity, and you need it to recycling. And then the consumers also. If you can buy a jeans for £5, it cannot be sustainable. So I think we all have a responsibility to kind of act honestly. And if we do that, the change can happen a lot quicker than we think.
On top of that too, I think the intention is a really important part of that, because as brands, the intention needs to come from an authentic place before we get into the messaging, correct? Now, you mentioned people turning up to have these conversations, and this conversation is taking place way beyond just this room. We've literally got thousands of people watching online. So hello to everyone watching online. Wish you could have been here. Right, moving on, Colin. Supply chain is thrown around so much, and even though you are definitely representing a very different team today, supply chain is something that affects your business just as much as Puma's. So can you explain what that means and why it's important to change the supply chain?
I think Bjorn put it well when he talked about how kind of our supply chains have changed. I always use the kind of the example. For many years, we were marauding garmentos, so to speak. The way in which we managed the back end of our supply chains is we kind of sailed country to country in search of the mythical prize of the lowest price. And that world has now kind of moved on, and we've had a very different approach to thinking about how we manage that and building relationship with our suppliers. And it's one of the things that's important for people here to remember. We actually don't own very many, if any, of our own manufacturing plants. We tend to work with third-party manufacturers, and so those partnerships and relationships are incredibly important. And it's also, again, building a little bit on Bjorn's point, it's also an incredibly complicated business. We talked earlier about footwear, and I always kind of use the example that footwear is it's 12 sizes, it's 52 components, and it's 365 operations, and it's in one factory with 5,000 people, and we make 300 million units a year. We have 15,000 containers.
All right, we get it.
This is a really complicated business. It's not something that you can necessarily boil down into really simple sound bites. But that's not to say that we can't continue to move things forward. And I think the supply chain work that we've done over the past few years, and the collaboration we're starting to see behind the scenes, where we're not competing, where there's clearly benefit to us thinking through how we work together, it's really how we can really start to drive the leverage and start to make the difference that we clearly need to make across the industry.
Right. Bjorn, what exactly is the opportunity here in collaborating with a brand like Under Armour?
Well, first of all, you have to remember that we source our product mainly by the same suppliers when it gets to materials, when it gets to those making the product, and also those who actually ship the product.
Correct.
And it's kind of insane that I go to Diamond with one set of standards, and then he comes in another time, then Nike comes, then Adi comes, and then and he has to audit his factory and do standards 16 times because he has 16 customers. And if we collaborate and say, okay, let's set the same standards, let's work together, he can do a much more efficient job. We don't drive him crazy. If we all say he should use renewable energy in his plants, why don't we all get together and demand that, and then we actually help him doing that? Same with material development, same with biodegradable. Today, there are many, many brands who are actually doing patents and IPs on biodegradability, which means that if I have a good idea, I hide it from him, which is kind of insane.
Yes.
So, I mean, what we're talking about, the two of us, and we're trying also to talk to other brands, is why don't we share patents and IP when it gets to sustainability?
Okay, well, on that, I have to be realistic, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the room that are thinking it's all well and good us talking about your collaboration, but how realistic is it for brands to say, you know what, we're not going to keep this as our IP, we want to share this. This is something everybody should use. Is that realistic?
Well, to be honest, we've had stakeholder meetings like this since 2003, so it's the 20th, I think, next year, but we never made it public. And I think the reason why we're making it public now is that people demand that we talk about it in an open space, because there's nothing to hide.
Yeah.
And if we do that, then it's obvious that all brands would like to share. I hope that this meeting will result that when we do it in next year here, then all the brands are here that we could share with. You know, then it would be easier, you know, because if all the big brands were sitting here that makes up, I don't know, 50-60% of the sports industry, and we say we agree, then you as consumers and NGOs and everything will say, okay, so show it then. Because earlier it's been a dialogue one-on-one, and I think we moved on, you know. And don't forget, underneath also all guys and girls, where's Anne? There is a bunch of young people that are putting a lot of pressure on us to do something different. You know?
Well, we're going to hear from some of those young people in the audience. They've got questions for you, for sure.
But I think it's important, just to build on Bjorn's point, I think it's important to realize we're not talking about distilling how we compete as brands. We have to still compete. I'm still going to kick his ass every week at retail, and he's going to try and kick mine. I'm a bit taller than him, so he's going to have to kick a little higher. But it's not to say that at the back end of the business, where there's clearly no need for us to compete, we shouldn't be working together to figure out how do we make a better world, and how do we address these real issues, and you know, and how do we work with our partners to kind of unlock that power and drive towards that. And that's achievable, and that's something that I think, you know, I know I'm committed to, and I know Bjorn is too.
Yeah. Lewis, I have to come to you now, because the suppliers are obviously an incredibly important part of this. And I imagine a lot of people, much like myself, that don't know the inner workings of the sneaker business, but have been a huge fan of the sneaker business their entire lives. You'd imagine that a supplier would be rolling their eyes at the idea of new machinery, new technology, having to bring new things in to be sustainable and work with these brands. What made you decide to do it, and how realistic is it for other people in your part of the game to follow suit?
As a supplier, our goal is always create the maximum value for our customer. So when we realize that when we know brands like PUMA support us to do the right things together, we are encouraged to know that we are on the right track. And our investment is in line with the expectation and the goals of our customer. At the same time, it also helps us to avoid duplicate efforts. It also avoid conflicting requirements, and that helps us to integrate with our customers' best interests better. So I think that's
okay. Lindita, how would you say this ties into the greenhouse gas reduction efforts and maybe even the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, well, I mean, as was mentioned many times, climate change is a systemic problem. And if we are to address it, no one single country or one single company or one single individual can do anything about it. When we look at the fashion industry more specifically, the majority of the impact when it comes to climate is in what we call technically Scope 3 emissions, which is the supply chain emissions. And there, of course, it is in the best interest of all companies, be they brands or suppliers, to work together, because that's the only way to get to net zero emissions by 2050 or before that, hopefully. But at the same time, it means that there's an opportunity for these different players to share costs, so that it is not impossible to do by 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 brands. I think in the UNFCCC, we have seen that the fashion industry is interested to collaborate. In fact, PUMA has been behind a lot of driving efforts to get the industry together under the framework of UNFCCC. We call it Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. And what we've done there, it's not that we are experts in fashion industry, we're not. But what we have done is we've heard a lot from all these different players, brands and suppliers and NGOs and industry associations to say where is the opportunity to collaborate better. And the opportunity to collaborate better is in data, measuring and tracking. The opportunity to collaborate better is in the raw materials arena. How do we make sure that materials that we use, recycle, reuse, etc., are actually giving us that clear environmental and social cost? How do we make sure that we switch to materials that are low carbon or climate friendly, and what does that mean? What does it mean to get certification for these types of materials? And then, of course, you look at the element of renewable energy. Scaling energy efficiency is something that makes business sense, so companies will do it anyway. But I think it's more about scaling renewable energy in countries that need it the most. How do we work with policymakers to ensure that policy environments are there? How do we work with financial institutions to ensure that the finance flows in the right direction? Just switching, putting solar panels on your rooftop, it can work. But if you want to do it at scale, you really need the right enabling conditions there. So I think the industry is now working to really identify what the opportunities are for them to do stuff together, but also what are the opportunities to bring other players along outside the fashion industry, because again, we are talking about radical collaboration. We have to learn to let each other into our decision-making processes. And I think PUMA has done it also in the past with sustainable stakeholder sessions that they've had. I've been there, I've seen those, and I think those conversations are very important. What is also more important is that all of us come into this conversation really positively, with a positive attitude and a constructive attitude, because at the end of the day, it is in our own interest to make it work.
Awesome. Okay, well, we've heard from the industry. No pressure, Alice. But you are essentially here on behalf of the people. And I'm fascinated to hear what you have to say off the back of everything that you've heard, because this is your world. And you live it and breathe it very much so. So what are your thoughts on what we've heard, not just now, but all day?
Well, much like you just said you're not an expert, and I'm also not an expert in manufacturing, nor a CEO of a big company, but I'm here as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, very passionate about the people that I've met on climate front lines. And if my story sounds anything similar to a prior speaker, Jack, he is my boyfriend, and I did show him my notes before this, and I'm seeing a few similarities between what he said and what I wrote. No, but for 5-6 years, we've both been traveling to climate front lines, and you'd be hard pressed. You would really have to not have an ounce of empathy to look into the eyes of the people surviving forced migration, refugee crisis, drought. The list goes on, and not connect with this issue. So yes, I'm a storyteller, but I'm also a young person who's frankly terrified. I'm an eternal optimist, but I have to say the pace of change over the last 2 months, the momentum with which we are seeing world-changing events, temperatures in the UK we didn't think we'd see till 2050, is terrifying. So I think, like every young person here, I'm desperately trying to navigate what to do and how to act. I'm trying to do the right thing in a deeply imperfect world, and that sort of makes me similar to you guys as well, trying to change extremely complex, imperfect systems. I think that collaboration is beyond a necessity, it's a survival strategy for businesses. Because young people want traceability, we want transparency, we want accountability. So it's an absolute necessity. It's long-term strategic thinking, actually. It's an investment in the long term. I think short-termism is what's got us here. So it's super exciting. There is so much opportunity here. I think in the climate space, we speak a lot of sacrifice, but there is incredible opportunity to build the better, fairer, greener world we so desperately and urgently need. And working together, I think we're limitless.
I could see you literally shifting in your chair there, Colin, because you were bursting to comment on that. I mean, do you have any thoughts on?
No, it's exciting. I genuinely believe this is we will be seeing a phase change, and we have to. You know, we will see this shift, which I believe will continue to gain momentum. And actually, it's an incredibly exciting time. I understand it's a terrifying time, but at the same time, you know, the opportunities for us to do things better, for us to address some of the sins of the past, for us to think through how we build a better world in all aspects, including equality as well, and the impact of that we talked a little bit about today as well, to me is an incredibly empowering thing for me as a leader of a business to really try and think through, how do I unlock that? Because that's the power that drives a business. People don't come to work for money. People don't come to, they do. Once you've got enough money, you come to work for what you believe in. And if you believe you can make the world a better place, well, is there a better mission? Is there a better value? You know, we have, you know, our mission specifically is to make you better. And how do we make the world better? And
well,
me,
we're staying with that
empowering.
Well, how do we make the value chain better?
Well, I think we've had a lot of individual conversations today. And one of the things we haven't talked a lot about is data. And I thought you referenced it well. You know, I think one of the things that we can do, certainly as businesses, is thinking how we use data differently and how it helps inform us to make decisions.
Right.
You know, we're now in a world where we actually now know, potentially because of the amount of data out there, what consumers want to buy before they bought it and before they know they need it. And that's a very different world than us making big container loads of goods and shipping them halfway across the world and just sitting them in a warehouse waiting for somebody to pull them off. You know, we need to move beyond that. It needs to be much more targeted, and data is going to allow us to do that in ways that we have only just really starting to understand. But, you know, thinking through how do we actually start to share that information in an appropriate way. It has to be appropriate because obviously we can't get in the way of our competition. Our competition has to be important just for the way in which we need to work as businesses. But from the point of view of just thinking about how we share that data, share that information, to me is something which, again, we're only just starting to understand at the moment.
Would you say you agree with that then, Bjorn, from a PUMA perspective?
Sure, but I think as a manager, I mean, we're living in a schizophrenic world. We're sitting here now, and I think, to be very honest, the last 3-4 months we've been focused more on, you know, energy crisis, inflation, war in Ukraine, what do we do with our people in Russia? So there are short-term things coming out of COVID, which kind of you be measured on. Let's face it, I'm going to be fired next year if I don't reach my targets, not because I'm doing the world better in 10 years. And this, what should I say, this balance is what reality is.
Yes.
The difference is that two things. First of all, if you have a value that goes to actually making the world better for our kids, then at least you have a goal. And secondly, the incentives you're getting. I'm paid also on sustainability targets. And yes, the report is far too thick, and I don't understand everything in it either, but that's how we measure it. And all our managers are now also bonus on sustainability. And if you set easy targets, they will actually guide it, even if the values sometimes are not right, if you know what I mean. I'm driving an electric car. I'm Norwegian. You know why I started? Because it was tax-free, you know, easy. Half of Norway drives electric cars because they don't pay taxes on it. You can also give incentives to guide people in a direction, and then the values take over. You know, I think we need to do both. We need to set measurable goals so that we get paid for actually achieving something. The consumer, if they knew that he had good products and I had bad products, if that was the case, which is probably the opposite, I'm just kidding, then of course people will buy like that. But people have no idea. As when you go into a store today, you don't know what product is sustainable or not.
Correct.
And as I said, if it's very, very cheap, it's not sustainable.
Right.
I think we should break this up. We
No, totally.
No, but it's true though. It's like, so I think there's many factors, but there's one big difference, and that makes me positive. There's not one day that we don't talk about making things that goes in that direction. That was different 5 years ago.
Yeah. Well, Alice, I was actually going to come to you next because you mentioned empathy. And I'm really interested to hear just how much empathy as consumers we should be having for these brands when we take into account just some of the things that have been spoken on. Do you think that we should empathize with these brands and the struggles and the targets that they have to hit in the not too distant future?
Bloody hell, what a question.
It's not like they're in the room or anything.
I think that this is deeply unglamorous, highly technical, highly complicated work. But if it's not too much of a cliche, with great power comes great responsibility. Is that in Spider-Man? I don't know. But you know, it has a huge and very important impact. And so I think accountability is incredibly important. Something else I would love to see is humanizing the supply chain. There are, as you say, incredible people, the processes in that supply chain. You know, I'm a sucker and relentlessly optimistic and passionate about the power of storytelling. And I think I want to see more of that. There's a reason we feel so disconnected, that those processes feel so invisible, lacking in transparency. I want to know what's happening. I want to know every stage. I want to know the wonderful people, the real superheroes that are working in that supply chain. And I think that's also another hugely exciting sort of opportunity. The other thing is, you know, if we speak about humanity and humanizing the processes, I think equally important is humanizing these conversations and having very human, deeply vulnerable conversations. And that's the power of this conversation right here. It is healing and crucially important for you guys, as you did this morning, to say, we're trying, this is difficult, but we haven't got it all worked out and there's still some way to go. Sure. That level of honesty and truth is its vulnerability, and it allows the consumer to have trust, because this is messy. And by the way, as an individual, I'm also navigating this.
Yep.
There are double standards in the way I behave. There's hypocrisy. But brands need to get better at not pretending that they're perfect, embracing that this is a journey of progress and not perfection, but be really honest about that.
Can we have a round of applause for Alice, please? I'm so glad that you are on this panel. You're awesome. You really are. Yeah, if you pretend to be perfect, you end up being Will Smith, and we all know how that played out. So let's stick with supply chain. Lewis, how do we bring sustainability in factories into the conversation? How is that something that you're implementing?
Sustainability. When we talk about sustainability, I would like to share one fact that Diamond Group has worked with PUMA for over 42 years consecutively. So I think we earn kind of reputations as a reliable and sustainable business partners through this kind of reliable long-term relationship with our customers. Our workers knows that, our suppliers knows that, some of our other customers knows that, and I think this is kind of priceless credentials for us. So if you talk about sustainability, I think trust, what Alice and some other panelists mentioned, is quite important. I would like to add one thing is people talk about data, those how to measurements. Actually, one of the example Diamond Group has joined together with NGOs and brands is the HIG Index project. We report our consistently data every day from all our production facilities to the system. And we get those to realize how much environmental impacts actually we created from our manufacturing activities, which those measurements benchmark not only external and internally, but also externally. And we can realize and we can make our most practical and meaningful changes to see the progress. And this progress, not only we can see it, our stakeholders all can see it. So that's something I would like to share.
Yeah. Lundisa, how much would you say the mindset of us as consumers can change, and what should be top of our priority list?
Consumer changes?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, though, because when we started to work with fashion industry in 2018, I thought that there was so much less transparency than what it is today. You know, there's more and more public information about what companies are doing. For example, under the charter, we have the public reporting that is mandatory. There's a strengthened accountability mechanism. But again, for that information to reach to consumers is very difficult because, as was mentioned, it's very technical data. And then, you know, you've got all these different standards, and it's really hard to understand what all these different terms mean for you as a consumer if you're not in the space. But I think that right now we are in a situation where we are slowly realizing that the calls of science from 50 years ago, that something is happening and we need to do something about climate and environment in general. I think that we are now at this really heightened awareness that is out there, and I think consumers do not see themselves just as fashion consumers, but as consumers of energy, consumers of water, consumers of everything else. So I think in that context, the consumers need to also be thinking a little bit more holistically. Of course, consumers cannot drive what the industry does. But as we know, the demand creates the supply. So if we as consumers demand the right things, then we can be sure that at some point we will have that same supply. But of course, consumers nowadays know that the way in which we are buying things and we're throwing them away is not sustainable and cannot be done going forward. So there's different models, different schemes out there about renting, about recycling, about there's how you wash your clothes, how you take care of them. So there's different things that we can do as consumers and as citizens. But I think that will not be sufficient to change current models of production, not just in the fashion industry, but overall. I think that we need the right policy signals. We also need to see this kind of climate action and awareness from the industry being done at scale. We need more of them to come together and really pave that way for the future, because what we're looking at now, we have about 8 years to halve emissions, not just as a fashion industry, but as a globe. Is that possible? Solutions are there. So science says it is possible. We can still change the direction. We're in a good time. It is, of course, uncertain times now with everything else going on, but it is also an exciting time because we know now what kind of future we want as consumers, but also as professionals as well.
Mm-hmm. Alice, what changes do you think we as consumers could and should be making?
I think we've had a lot. I mean, you mentioned this morning that, overconsumption. I think the climate crisis is as much a crisis of consumption as anything. It's a crisis of disposability, and in that sense, we desperately need a values shift. I think there's a key conversation between the role of corporations versus consumers. Of course, we know, and this is what we've been hearing, corporations need to lead on this. But in terms of consumers, I'm really terrified at the moment that we are sort of moving, as we see the realities of climate change get worse and worse, into a period of despair where the individual doesn't feel powerful. Every day in our storytelling, we ask ourselves, how can we give people a sense of agency, make them feel they can make a difference? Because the opposite is to think, well, we're fucked, so I'm just going to bury my head in the sand and not do anything about it. And this, I almost think we are, thank God, creeping our way out of a long era of climate denial into an era of climate despair, and that's really, really dangerous. Every one of us has a role to play as a consumer, but beyond that, as a citizen and also as creatives. I imagine there are brilliant creative minds here. There are amazing creative minds in the audience. The movement needs you. We need to paint a vision of the world that we desperately need to create. We need to harness every tool that we have at our disposal to do that. And collaboration, you mentioned it, among fashion brands is absolutely crucial. Collaboration amongst businesses, between generations, but also between us and nature. We've been at war with our planet. Let's work with her now and learn from her.
Okay, please get your questions ready because we're going to be coming to you shortly. For now, though, we have had some questions sent in. So first question is, how can competitors in the industry find a way to work together without compromising their own success? Bjorn?
Well, I think there's enough areas where we can compete. We don't need to do it on supply chain and sustainability. I have better athletes than him. That's why I sell more than him. It's easy. I do better marketing. I do better design. That's fine. But I think there are things when it gets to dealing with the factories, dealing with freight, dealing with materials, dealing with take-back systems. Why should we have that alone? I think we haven't mentioned the retailers here, but I think many of you forget one thing is that the front end to our consumer is not us. I have 1,000 stores. I don't know how many you have, but our retailers have 30, 50, 100,000. So the retailer needs to sit there because it's easier for one to go to Foot Locker and give the shoes back than it is to look for an outlet for PUMA.
Yes.
So I think there are areas that we don't need to compete on. There's so many other levels, you know.
Colin, how about yourself? From an infrastructure standpoint, is there anything that could be shared or that could be done?
No, it's not. I mean, we're on a journey, aren't we? You know, we're working through that process, as Bjorn said. I mean, we're working with the factories and just understanding that back end of the business, how we kind of engage with them is an obvious place where we can move things forward. We also talked a little bit about take back and you know, thinking about how do we actually bring product back for consumers and bring it back into our supply chain. I'm not going to be able to firewall off my Under Armour supply chain from a Puma supply chain from a Nike's. It makes no sense. If we're going to take products back, I should be taking Bjorn's products back, and he should be taking mine, and we should be re-engineering it back into product in ways that are appropriate and efficient and done appropriately. But I will just want to reference something Alice said, because I thought, you know, one of the things I was reflecting on as Alice was talking is there's a model called the House of Change. I'm not if you've ever seen it. Go online and look it up. And it talks about how you move through kind of a house. And you start off with denial. One room is denial. And then you go into the dungeon of despair. And then ultimately you go into the room of renewal. And I think we're in the dungeon of despair at the moment. I think we need to figure out how we get into that renewal. And I think there's enough impetus, I believe, and there's enough energy, and we have to get into that kind of next kind of iteration. And to be frank with you, that's one of the reasons I'm sitting here today. Yeah. Because, you know, I'm committed to help the industry get there, and I know many of my colleagues that are not sitting on the stage today, to be frank with you, that Anne-Laure and I work with, they're also committed to doing the same thing. So I think we're moving.
Okay. Well, the questions do keep coming. These are specifically to yourselves again. I'm sorry, Bjorn and Colin, putting you under pressure here, but there's another question for you both. Does your message change if you are addressing investors and not an audience of young people, and I'll add on to that, and thousands of people watching at home and people with a social media account right now probably tweeting everything that you're saying? Does it change?
I mean, you are aware that we as public companies are reporting to the investors every quarter.
Correct.
And 99% of the questions of the last quarters have been price increases, China situation, war in Ukraine, and inflation. And it's true that, yes, the investors talk about sustainability and index, but it takes, if you talk with them for 1 hour, it takes 1 minute. So there is a big difference between the short-term financial, what should I say, market, and the things that we talk about here. And I know you're just an interim CEO, right?
Correct.
And we laugh about this because we're all on the interim. You know, it's like you borrow a company for a short period of time, and you need to please the short term and the long term. That's the way this is, you know, and that's why it's so important that, you know, we take certain things as value, and that is the things we talk about. And the other thing is we compete very, very hard on the short-term issues. And that is the schizophrenic situation that we are in. But yes, the investors, especially now when we're going into the most difficult time I think in the industry has had. You have to remember we're coming out of COVID, and now we have double-digit inflation in all the markets. We have the energy crisis, and we will have consumer demand going down, which maybe is good for someone, but short-term is difficult for us. And we're going to go into a very difficult time in the financial market. And so the reality is that you're always trying to balance, and the questions are very, very different.
Sure. Okay.
I would also just say that I think if you think of the stock price as a reflection of the future value of your organization, which is what actually a stock price is, you know, investors are looking to understand the future value of your organization. And, you know, companies that can really articulate this well in the way in which the consumers are looking to engage within this area will ultimately, I believe, actually drive up the value for companies that are invested in this. So, I mean, it's not only just the right thing to do for the planet, it's the right thing to do for business as well, because ultimately you get those two things together and it can be exponentially better.
Okay, let's move on to questions in the room. If you have a question, please get your hand up. We will find you with a microphone. We have a question at the back. Let's start over there with this gentleman. Please say your name.
My name's Ted.
Hello, Ted. Where are you from, Ted?
I'm from London originally.
And what size shoe are you, Ted?
10.
A 10?
Yeah.
UK. Good.
We've got some in the
You're
back.
gonna hook me up.
Yeah, we'll look after you. I think that Bjorn's a size 10, so he'll take off his shoes for you.
I appreciate that.
Sustainability, look at that. What's your question?
I've got a question for Bjorn. It's a key feature of the circular economy is keeping products at their highest value in the chain for as long as possible in use. So there may be a conflict between repeat sales, so people buying products again, and keeping products in use for longer, so their durability. How does PUMA intend to manage this?
Well, that's a difficult question. Of course, you know that reality is that we both need to grow. I mean, that's how you create value publicly. And I think what we need to do is to try to find ways of being more efficient with how we actually make the products that we sell more of. And the more you do circular, the better it is. If you look at soccer jerseys, we talked about it, we think that we can reuse 75% of the material to build the next jersey. So Manchester City can actually play in the same jersey year after year, but it just looks different. It's the same material. And I think that's where we need to, work on. To set targets that we should sell less because that's good for the climate, I think that will be the next generation. I think we also should be aware of that when you talk about overconsumption, that's in the Western world. If you go to other markets, you go to Africa, you go to India, you go to China, they have not been through the same wealth that we have. So I think we also need to balance a little bit where things are in the world. And the fact of the matter is that in his countries, he's been producing for us all the time. He's been producing for me in Norway and you in England, and he's not been producing for his local people in Vietnam or in. So we also have to be honest that we take also a little bit the blame in the Western world for where we are, and not push all the thing to the guys that we now are saying are polluting the most, because that's very, very unfair. We, at least, I think we all have the same idea. We will continue to try to grow, but to grow in a very, very efficient way. So what we are actually taking away from the planet is less and less and less and less. And maybe one day we can get to almost 100% circularity. That would be the best.
Thank you so much for your question that you just came up with on the fly and definitely didn't write down. Appreciate that. Okay, let's get another question from the audience. Let's go to the front row, just here. I think anybody with a dress as flamboyant deserves the microphone.
Thank you. So I believe there were protesters outside from the Boycott PUMA campaign, and they are accusing PUMA of having business operations in illegal Israeli settlements. I just want to hear your stance on that.
Do you want to answer?
Nope, that one's all yours.
I mean, this has nothing to do with sustainability, but I can answer. I saw them too, BDS for People. Yes, our distributor in Israel is sponsoring the Israeli national team. And the Israel national team is member of FIFA and UEFA and play international tournaments. They have, I think the last time they had a squad, they had 23 Jewish people, 6 Muslims and 3 with other backgrounds. The players play mostly around in all of Europe, and they play national, games against Norway or England. We have absolutely no sponsorships in the settlements. So I think when people make this story, they're trying to say that we should not sponsor Israel. But we don't sponsor the Israeli government. We sponsor the players that actually play for the national team. And we gave exactly the same offer when we did this, or our distributor, to the Palestine national team, which is also a member of UEFA and FIFA. So again, I mean, I'm sorry. It's like I don't know what to do, because I can say, no, I don't sponsor Israel anymore when the contract runs out. But then I have the Israelis attacking us, right? Now I have the Palestine. So whatever you do is wrong. I think as a sports company, we sponsor athletes. And as long as the athletes are not political, why shouldn't we give them the equipment? That's how it is. I don't have any other answer.
Well, thank you for answering, and thank you so much for the question. Okay, before we come back to the audience, I'm going to ask a question that's just as easy to answer. Has there been progress with workers' rights in the supply chain as well?
We're going to go.
I think this one's yours. I'm not sure.
Regarding the social compliance, I think Diamond Group, we have factory in China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia. For the last 5 years, these 4 countries are short of labor. So social compliance is no longer our obligation. It's become our advantage. If we really want to have sufficient capacity, We need to increase the social compliance. We need to add a lot of new benefits. So social compliance in these 4 countries, for me, it's not like 10 years ago, that's forced labor. If you read the local news, if you see the local labor market, all advertisement, every factory look for workers. So I'm more confident that the fair labor issues now is much better. I also want to use another example of the collaboration. Since 2007, we work with PUMA and Fair Labor Association. I think Under Armour is one of the founders of FLA. We developed the concept of decent wage. We do multiple rounds of wage survey, try to use decent wage to replace the minimum wage. And that's 2007. And now I think it's not a popular topic because if you look at Vietnam, every factory uses double the minimum wage as the entry level of the salary standard. So that's my answer to this.
Okay, fair play. Let's come back to you guys in the room. Please put your hand up. Scary Spice has a question.
Sorry, hi, Andy again. I touched on it previously with the previous question, and we're just talking about like you've got to meet your targets, and you've got to, as a business, any business in any industry has to grow economically to survive and to thrive. So I think my question is like looking forward, how do you change your business model to do the whole decouple growth from your emissions or decouple growth from resource depletion, or like, please don't have to disclose any competitively sensitive information. But yeah, how do you, looking forwards, change your business model, change your strategy to be able to both grow economically as a business, but also reduce emissions and reduce resource depletion?
Well, I mean, we have committed to very, very clear targets. You know, we want to be net zero in 2050. We want to actually go down 60% by 2030. If you look at our own, you know, we're using 100% renewable energy in everything that PUMA owns. And of course, the challenge now is to transfer that into the rest of the supply chain. And again, you know, the investments that we need to do with our partners is something we need to collaborate on. But there are very, very clear targets in how we can actually reduce the emissions. And they are not in conflict with the financial targets because they cannot be, you know. And this is what I'm saying is that we need, what should I say, scientists to help us on the material side. We need to help them on actually setting up, you know, renewable energy, for example, in Vietnam, which is a problem. And then if we do that together, then these, what should I say, targets on the climate will actually come automatically because we're doing it. And then we will compete in marketing and design and all the rest because that's what we have to do. I think a leader that sits here and tells you that he is not going to grow because he's going to save the planet is not telling the truth, because that's not the way it works, you know. So we need to be more efficient in the way we use the resources. That's why we have scientists on the what should I say, on many areas. And again, you know, if it's the re-suede or if it's the re-jersey or other what should I say, projects on different technologies, that's coming from the science. And I hear you guys that you don't understand what they're saying because it's complicated, even for me. And I think we need storytellers to tell those stories that you consumers believe in what we're doing. But behind it, you need a book like that because you need to measure everything, you know. I mean, I have to be honest, 25 years ago in the industry, we were doing chemicals that were really bad. I mean, he didn't care what he put in the shoes because we didn't demand anything. Now, you know, with all the, what should I say, regulation we have on chemicals, it's changed dramatically, you know. And that's why you need to combine science, how you measure it, how you report it, with how we're actually telling the stories. And I think we have not been good at telling the stories to you. I think we're very good telling the stories about Rihanna or Neymar or whatever, but we haven't been as good as the storytelling on the sustainability thing. And that's, you know, why we need young people. You should be aware, and then I'll shut up. In our office in Germany, the head office, our average age is about 28 years old. So the people that are working on this is not us. It is young people, and I think you will see that pretty quickly. Why are you laughing?
I'm 28. Times 2.
It's just the way it is, but we are a very young industry on the creative side also when it gets to this direction. The people you saw here today and a lot of the young PUMA people are working only on sustainability. Also.
Colin, what's the answer from the Under Armour perspective?
I think Bjorn hit most of it. What gets measured gets managed. And, I think, at the end of the day, I think these kind of conversations, stakeholder engagement and having stakeholders give us input is incredibly important, and that's one of the reasons I'm sitting here today. I mean, you asked Alice earlier whether she should have empathy for us brands. No, hell, she shouldn't have empathy for us. She should be holding us to help drive things forward in a way, but in a way that at least is respectful and understanding of the challenges that we're dealing with, because it ain't easy. There are going to be issues. It's going to be 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, but we need to be held accountable, and we will continue to execute against that, and we will grow our business. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be incremental growth. It doesn't mean I have to sell more shoes to you as the normal Under Armour competitor. What I need to do is sell more Under Armour shoes to the Puma customer, because ultimately, or the Nike customer, or the Adidas customer, or whoever, I can increase the size of my pie. And that's where we should compete. We should compete actually on the level playing field from that point of view, not from the point of view of how we're actually driving these things forward. So I think we'll get to the right things, and I think we're leaning into it the right way.
Fantastic question. Thank you so much. I know I'm tempted to come to you for a question, but we genuinely are out of time. There's a little thing on this screen right now that's screaming profanity at me. It's very rude, but I won't repeat that. I'm going to give the last word to you, Alice, on this. We've touched on so many things throughout the day, and we've had what I think is a really interesting conversation. But as I said at the beginning, you are essentially our mouthpiece for the people here. So you've got the ear of 2 CEOs and thousands of people around the world watching. What would you have to say on what it is that we've discussed today? And hopefully a good takeaway.
No pressure.
No pressure. I mean, just don't be shit.
No, Lenita, you mentioned radical collaboration, and I love that sentence, that phrase, because we're living in radical times. And so I would invite us all and our panelists and I was about to say fellow CEOs, not fellow CEOs. The CEOs here, we also need radical imagination. And I wonder whether we can reimagine how things work, improve those systems and frameworks that haven't been serving us.
Amazing. Can we please put our hands together for an incredible panel? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to steal Colin and Bjorn. Do you want to come with me to centre stage? Can you make some noise for the rest of our panel, please?